Hello and welcome. Welcome to the session today on inclusive leadership. My name is Helen Letchfield. I am the co-founder of Parent and Professional P&P Coaching. So I know we've got quite a few clients joining today, but for those of you who don't know us, we're a coaching organisation and we support family-friendly cultures in the workplace, flexibility and family-friendly cultures, and we do that through coaching and development. My background personally is learning and development in financial services. I'm also a qualified ICF coach. When I co-founded P&P 15 years ago, we have, since then been working with about 60, 70 different organisations across all sectors in helping promote a family-friendly and flexible working culture. So today I'm sitting on the panel because of my personal passion really about inclusive leadership. I recognise just how much it can benefit specifically parents, carers and those people who need support and recognition during those big life changes at work, for anything from parental transition to the menopause to midlife health. So that's me, and what I'm going to do first of all is hand over to Dawn Jackson, because Dawn is going to facilitate today's panel event.
Thanks very much, Helen. So hello everybody, welcome to the session. So I'm Dawn Jackson. I'm a director of my own company called Coach Inclusion, where I develop leaders across all sectors of industry, whether that be public, private, financial services. There's a whole gamut, whole range. And what I do is I work on facilitating events and one-to-one coaching and group coaching to help rise and develop leaders to be more inclusive. But my particular focus in doing this is creating diverse teams, helping leaders to create diverse teams which innovate because they are collaborative. So it's one thing about having a diverse team, but if they don't collaborate, then that's not going to be an effective team. So at the same time, that's also thinking about belonging. So by doing that, you're helping people to understand the contribution they make and the value they add. So that's my particular area of focus within this. So I'm going to pass over to my colleagues to introduce themselves and their own perspective on this incredibly important subject. So let me start with Claire. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Dawn. Hi, everyone. So my name's Claire Foy, not the actress, sadly. But I am head of capability for the NatWest Wealth businesses, which include the Coutts Bank. And I also run my own business, coaching business, Flying Iguana. And similarly to Dawn, ours is very much based on the sense of belonging, but working with leaders and teams to create that space to understand difference and just know that it's not always sort of the differences that they can see, but also the differences in behaviors and mindsets, and really working with all those differences in the team to strengthen that team dynamic, creating the psychological safety so that everyone in the team feels that they can show up who they are. So that's me.
Thank you so much, Claire. Daniela, can I pass to you?
So, hi everyone, I'm Daniele Fiandaca. I am founder of Tokenman Consulting, which is a consultancy that specializes in engaging senior leaders and men with inclusion, equity and diversity, and inspires them to become better allies and agents of change.
Amazing, thank you. And last but not least, Jeremy.
So yeah, good. Hi everyone. Thanks Dawn, thanks Helen for inviting me. So yeah, Jeremy Stockdale, I'm the founder of YLead, and after a 27-year career in financial services where I found that leadership was the thing I really loved, I founded YLead because I wanted to help more leaders lead with a sense of purpose and humanity and collaboration. Because I think if they can do that, people are more likely to want to follow them because they feel they can follow a human. And so, and I think leaders like that are ones more likely to foster inclusive environments that everyone can thrive in.
Great, thank you so much. So we're looking forward to this conversation because we're coming at it from so many different perspectives. So I know that we've got a lot of people from HR, L&D, diversity and inclusion on the call, and also some managers and leaders. So what we're going to do is start first of all with some questions around leadership. So direct questions around leadership, and then we'll move in. So how can HR, diversity and inclusion, and L&D better support leaders and empower leaders? So let me go to the first question around this. So this is an exciting one because it talks about how people feel when they are working for or with an inclusive leader. So what are inclusive leaders doing differently? So I'm going to start, if that's okay, with Jeremy. What do you think around that subject?
Yeah, it's a great question because I remember what really helped me as a leader, and it was quite a few years into my leadership career, was when I realized that it wasn't really about what you did or how you do it; it was how you made people feel that really counts. And for me, I started off with 3 things that I thought were important, and I added 2 more. So I think essentially how people want to feel is they want to feel cared for, they want to feel nurtured, and they want to feel rewarded. So they're appreciated for what they do, they're developed and they're stretched, but they, fundamentally there is care for them as a human being. I think in addition to that, it's partly because I read about Project Amadeus that Google did, people also want to feel psychologically safe. And I think psychological safety is so fundamentally important to creating high performing organizations that it's well researched and well documented. So people want to feel safe. And I think also people want to feel inspired. They want to be inspired by what they do and the people around them. So I think if you can create an environment where people are cared for, nurtured, rewarded, they feel safe and they're inspired, I think you've got a great environment for people to thrive in.
Yeah, great points actually, and it's the how, isn't it? It's the how that happens. That's always the question. And what I'm thinking of is, as we're doing this, we're probably getting loads of people thinking, oh, I've got a question in relation to that. We're going to try and cover this off in Q&A at the end. So if you've got questions, please feel free to start putting them in the chat box, because this is where we're going to have a much broader discussion with you involved as the audience. So thanks, Jeremy. And I love that link to psychological safety. I'm gonna pass to Claire actually for a perspective. Anything to add on that one?
I mean, I would absolutely agree with the psychological safety, and often that comes from leaders showing their own vulnerability. So we find a lot of leaders carry a bit of an ego, and that often comes from a place of fear. I don't want to be found out. I've made it this far without showing any vulnerability. And we find that leaders that can actually say, do you know what, I'm not fully formed. Knowing that you'll never be fully formed is quite nice. So just sharing that and allowing other people to share that they're not able to do everything, and then playing to strengths, not treating everybody the way you want to be treating them, but identifying every individual as somebody who wants to be treated slightly differently. So it's actually going back to Jeremy's point. It's less about you. Well, I think it's less about you. In fact, it's nothing about you. It's all about who you're working with, and how they receive you. And actually the job of a leader is hard work, because it's very selfless, or it should be. So yeah, vulnerability and leading people how they want to be led, I think creates that real feeling of belonging, and noticing difference and valuing difference.
Claire, can I add? Are you
Please,
talking
Danielle.
actually? It actually reminded me of a story that I haven't thought about for at least about 8 years ago. About 10 years ago, actually, I was running a course through Hyper Island, and one of the first things we say is leave your egos at the door. So exactly to your point about that ego. And I spent a day speaking to this. It was a white straight man, and he was open, he was vulnerable. And for some reason, he invited me to a meeting he was going to, because I was at the head of innovation of an agency at the time. And I know he was a bit nervous inviting me, but he said, no, come along. I then watched him walk out that door and change. And I'll be honest, he was an absolute arsehole in that meeting. And from this man who'd been open and had dropped his ego, and figuratively, it wasn't just figuratively, he had actually dropped it. He then all of a sudden went put this sheet of armor back on that clearly he felt was the only way that he could be successful to be this thing. And I think understanding that and just understanding how the dynamics around you actually make everyone, it does make everyone perform in a behavior that often isn't actually natural to them. Is really important.
Can I just add a great story? Because I was chatting to somebody who's incredibly senior, a male, about imposter syndrome. And he said, the difference for me is when I have imposter syndrome, I peacock. I've been taught at school to man up, to big up. So when you see me being a bit of a peacock, that's because I'm terrified. That's
so
that.
funny.
And it was such an interesting dynamic because with women, it's almost like they go, "Oh, I can't do it," whereas men, they go, "I definitely can," even
So
inside they're dying.
that what's so funny is that's my post on Friday on LinkedIn.
Very connected.
I've done exactly the same thing, and I know in my early journey with inclusion, equity, and diversity, there are some people that think I'm a bit of an idiot or an arsehole, and they're probably and they're not right, because I don't think I am, but on my behaviour, I understand why they thought that, because I did exactly that. I felt I had to speak, I had to overcompensate, because that's how we're taught to be successful.
Yeah, great question, great point. And let's go back to what Claire said about vulnerability as well, because in my experience, leaders like to know all the answers, and I think it's more about knowing which questions to ask, particularly around inclusive leadership. So I think there is a fear, and there is an armour that's hiding that fear, as Daniela just mentioned. So thanks, really, really interesting perspectives there. And I want to keep with that subject of leadership, because let's think more broadly. Let's think about leaders' role in creating inclusive cultures. So perhaps the first question was more about the teams and how they engage with teams, but broadening it out a bit, what's the role of leaders in shaping and fostering an inclusive culture where everybody can thrive? And I'm going to just stay with Daniela on that one. What do you think?
Well, actually, so I run inclusive leadership programs for senior leadership teams, and
Hmm.
so if I look at what we focus actually on 4 things. One is exactly what Claire talked about. Vulnerability is my favourite subject. I do believe it is the secret ingredient to unlocking inclusive, but diverse and equitable workplaces. Second is culture intelligence. Third is empathy. The fourth one actually is agents of change. So I think we have to recognise, and I will talk about this in allyship, is you're not a true ally unless you're changing the system. Yeah, supporting or mentoring or sponsoring a single person is helping a single person. That's just being a good human being. That is not being an ally to inclusion, equity, and diversity. What we have to do is recognise that we exist in systems that are broken, and by definition, they exclude people. So I think for me, that being an agent of change as an inclusive leader is about understanding that system, working how it's broken, and then making lots and lots and lots and lots of small changes to make that culture better.
Right, yeah. And I think it also extends, doesn't it, Daniel, to the fact that society as a whole, one could say, is broken. So systems are operating within a bigger society. And sometimes people and leaders feel constrained, don't they? That they can't make a difference because society is broken, you know. So it's talking about that, getting them empowered around that. So I'm going to also ask Jeremy if he's got an additional point around that, around the cultural shift that you can achieve as inclusive leaders.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always believed that it's the leader has a pivotal role to play. And I think it's recognizing organizations always, and therefore individual leaders, overestimate what can be done in the short term, but underestimate what can be done in the long term. And so if you're looking to shift a culture and improve a culture, you have to understand what you're working with, and then you've got to take a long-term view. You know, don't think of this year. Think of in 3 years where we'd like it to be.
Right.
And share that with people, get their views, ask them how they would like it to feel, and create something that is going to be inclusive of everyone. But this is, I think, where we so often go wrong. You know, we come up with something, but we don't really work to embed it and create it over the long term, and so it just becomes, you know, words that aren't really lived and breathed. So the leader's role is pivotal, and if you want a certain culture, the leader has to absolutely role model that, and constantly be seeking feedback on how they're doing, and be prepared to accept it.
Yeah. And that's outside of processes, isn't it? It's about everyday conversations.
Yeah.
And becoming an agent of change in everything you do, going back to Daniela's point around allies as agent of change. So, yeah, go for it, Helen.
Because I was just thinking as you were talking that, you know, the one thing that I've noticed about some of the managers that I've worked with who I would describe as exceptional when it comes to inclusive leadership has been those who've got that brilliant balance between being clear on the outcome, the expected performance and the objective. So always being really hard on the outcomes, but at the same time enabling people to have that time and space to deliver those outcomes in a way which best suits them. So the how bit and how that's delivered needs to be, of course, less prescriptive, because we are all going to be doing things differently. And I think if I'm thinking with my parents and carers hat on, I think a lot of parents and carers who need more flexibility during the day sometimes to deliver those objectives, as long as they ultimately get those objectives delivered and they meet the performance standards.
Right.
If they have to work an extra day a week from home, or they need to take an hour off to, you know, deal with an emergency at home, how they do it doesn't really matter, as long as they get there in the end. And I think the best leaders are the ones that are less prescriptive around, you need to do it in this way and be in the office at this particular point every single day.
Great point, actually, and I love the pragmatic, the practical recommendations there. So I'm going to stay with that, because Helen, because there's a number of things, isn't there, that actions leaders can take to practically make this happen. So let's think about the practicalities here, other practical examples, and I'm going to come to Claire. Are they builds on what Helen has just said, or where you resonate as well with what you said?
Yeah, and I think so completely agree with what Helen was saying. I think it goes back to balance. So there's no point in having a purely empathic leader.
Yeah.
You need a leader that has challenge. And there's no point in having a leader that's completely free and visionary and just let yourself go. You need a leader that has structure. And you need a leader that can see opportunities, but also see risks, and, you know, be advocates of change, but create stability. And that's why it's tiring. So I think the first thing that the practical actions that a leader can do genuinely is be really aware of themselves, like totally understand how they show up under pressure, what happens when they're tired or angry or hungry, you know, what's their shadow, who do they go out for a drink with after work, who do they give the jobs to, really just noticing them. And I think, going back to Jeremy's point, giving them the space to explore that first and accept that. Again, going back to, you're not fully formed and you never will be. Once they've accepted that, then noticing, you know, how they might be perceived by others who are different to them. And where they think they're being very empathic, others might think they're being overly soft, or when they think they're being very, you know, optimistic, others think they're being a bit cowboy. And really noticing who's in the team and knowing those people. And so I think practically know yourself first, know your method, know your mind, and then start thinking about that for everybody else. And really sort of treat people differently. Treat them as they need to be treated. And I think, going back to Helen's point, you're absolutely right. We're in a very grown-up world. We need freedom in a framework. We need structure, but we need flexibility. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that freedom in the framework, because that sort of also links into things like policies and processes. Where's the flexibility? How can leaders engage with a policy? What can they be empowered to do, even though the policy's there and it's quite rigid? What can they do to therefore navigate through it based on a person's individual preference and how people are? Great point. Daniele, any additional comments on practicalities of this?
I actually would love to hear from Helen on this one. I think she's got, I'd love to hear from Helen.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that I would think about is, as around that, we work with a really diverse lot of clients and in different sectors, and a couple of the clients that we work with, organizations that really stand out, have got this brilliant, what they call a family first culture. And so that culture is all about every leader giving out the message that if you're experiencing times of challenge, personal hardship, difficulties, as we all do in our life, that's normal, then we're here to help you. It's family first, and your health and well-being comes first, which I think is brilliant. But that's only obviously part of it, because the best leaders are not only giving that message, they're also following it up with a robust system to make sure that they can continue to be family first. So, for example, if you're talking about saying to somebody, yeah, of course, you know, you could work 4 days a week, because we understand that, you know, on that 5th day, you want to be able to spend time with your family and your caring responsibilities. However, if the manager fails to put change the objectives for that individual and still expects them to be achieving the objectives as if they're working a full 5-day week, that individual is going to quickly fail. They're not going to meet the required objectives, and they're going to be very quickly very, very stressed. So I think it's a mixture of having the family first mentality, and I'm here to support you, but if you are, make sure that you've got the systems and the people in place ready to support what you're saying that you're going to do.
Helen, so I've never heard of that family first. So, but I think so I do every year I do the masculine to the workplace research, which fundamentally, until we start accepting that most workplaces we work in are masculine, we're not going to be able to start shifting them. And it's so sad for me in that research that actually 46% of people feel that men have to put work in front of family. Yeah, and if we look at one of the key issues when we talk about the glass ceiling, is we know that one of the issues is a parent. I mean, it's really it's a parent pay gap. It just so happens it's a primary caregiver pay gap. It just so happens that women take the large proportion of that, and men find it very hard, even when they want to. They find it very hard to lean into it because they get judged as well.
An example, in my experience, where we used to get women to talk about part-time working back in the day and what that felt like. And I remember having a guy come over to me and said to me, I'm also a part-time worker, but I daren't say anything about it because I feel bad about it. I feel uncomfortable. And he wouldn't talk because he felt the culture was against him being a part-time worker, and it would actually affect his career progression. So it sort of links into what you were saying. Jeremy.
Sorry, Dawn, just very quickly, when my daughter was born, I jokingly said to my boss, because we were having a conversation about flexible working, I said, oh, 9-day fortnight, that sounds interesting. I'd love to do that. And so I did. And the idea was that not only would I do it, but I would be very vocal about it. It would have been brilliant if I'd just done it and I kept it to myself, because it was only jokes, but the backlash I got about doing it, oh, yeah, when your day's off today, you work. Yeah. It was almost constant. And in the end, I just quietly dropped it. We go back a number of years here. We're going back 20 odd years. So I totally agree. If you're going to put those systems in place and you're going to say these things, you've got to back it up. I mean, I think Helen's point's a great one.
I mean, Helen.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, just interesting. So we've introduced parental leave in NatWest, so men get 6 months now if they want it. What's really, really struck me is the amount of men coming to me applying for professional qualifications to do in their 6 months off. And I haven't really, I mean, I have connected the dots, but they contact me and they're like, so I'm going to do the qualification when I'm off on my parental leave. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But, have you, and this is like first time parents and things like that. And you kind of have to say, hold it lightly. This is not just about taking 6 months. This is genuinely like parental leave. You're going to see it. But it's interesting, the gap of what they kind of think that time off is for. But yeah, it's just struck me. It's just in the past couple of months I've really noticed it.
I also think it really ties into one of the biggest challenges that we have when it comes to inclusive leadership, is what I have found, and again, all of these are generalizations, and unfortunately I have to use them so we can understand how we create the change, is men do not tend to prioritize anything. I'm going to say it. Men do not tend to prioritize anything unless it's clear as a clear path to furthering their career. And what I'm seeing right now, and it's one I saw a lovely poll the other day, people saying, what do you think is going to be the biggest change to making inclusive workplaces? And it was leadership accountability. And right now, I do not think that men, I'm going to say specifically men, see becoming inclusive leaders as progressing their career. In fact, I can tell you now, I know more men who have embraced vulnerability, who have embraced empathy, that it's actually been detrimental to their career, or they've been told it's detrimental to their career. So I think that's the key shift that needs to happen, is we need to have at the senior level is the CEO, the senior leadership saying, this is fundamental. We have gone on our own journeys. We're going to create that space. And if you don't come on this journey with it, that's fine. You just won't be promoted.
I think there's also something, isn't there, about not just necessarily top down it's about the collective making change happen at different levels. And there are different levels of leadership that feel that they can't because it's not coming top down. And that drives paralysis. People don't do anything. But there are things you can be doing in spite of that to change the system, to help inform the system.
Go on, sorry.
Go ahead,
Claire,
Danielle.
go, Claire.
Go on, Claire, then Daniel.
So I think yes, I agree with you, but I sometimes work with teams that so like I'll work with a sales team. They will see the value of embracing vulnerability, but then when they start showing it, they get judged from other people in the organization. So unless you create the culture at the top, to a certain extent, there's a damage. So what happens is, and I've seen this, I've seen those people that are embracing it. If you do it at a lower level, is you start getting judged in the same way a woman gets judged, and actually this starts to become a penalty. So what people will start, very similar to what Jeremy said, is they'll start practicing it, and then they'll just stop it. So all that good work you've done to get them to see the benefit, all of a sudden they will stop it. So it is so important that we start at that senior leadership level.
You also think about role modelling as well, making sure role modelling is out there. People are clear what good leadership looks like and what the role models, who the role models are.
Claire, you want to say something?
Yeah, go
I
for
was
it, Claire.
gonna say, yeah, I mean, certainly in my experience, it is a multi-pronged approach. It is absolutely senior leaders. It's demonstrating, it's educating the senior leaders. It's giving them space, giving all that. And we ran a program last year called Woman Up. And I ran that not for coaching women as such, although it was a women's coaching program. It was because I'd coached so many women who had said to me, well, I applied for, this role 5 years ago, and my boss said, oh, you'll never get it if you're part-time. And I said, so what then did you do? Well, 5 years later, I'm still believing that. So we ran a program to say to women, you've got to get yourself off the sticky floor. You've got to fight back a little bit. You can't just accept everything you hear. So I think there's that, and it's not empowering because I hate that word, but it's as a senior woman, I would leave the room at 4 o'clock every day. And as people would comment and, oh yeah, that's right, you don't work past 4, you don't do this, don't that, I'd say no. And I've got a 3-year-old that's about to get booted off a minibus and he trumps all of you. And it was just a moment of, and I've always been that woman who will speak up. I'm very comfortable with that. And a lot of women aren't. So I think it's speaking about it, it's owning it, it's holding, it's just making it really vocal, and then calling it out when people shame it. I just think, it's lots of different things.
Yeah.
Systemically, there's a massive shift that needs to happen.
Yeah, and each culture is different in terms of how you therefore play that out. It just needs one senior influencer somewhere. It doesn't have to be right at the top to actually start traction. So I'm going to move on, if that's okay, if I may, onto looking more so at L&D teams, HR, diversity and inclusion, and how they can enable leaders to be more inclusive. Now, I know this is a difficult job because I've been there. I've been in HR for many, many years. So really, really interested. And perhaps Helen, we'll start with you around what could HR, learning teams, diversity and inclusion be doing to empower leaders, do you think?
I mean, I think the first thing is just linking to everything that we've just been talking about around the role modelling. So I think a lot of people in HR and D&I can feel quite frustrated and can get into that way of thinking of, how are we going to get our leaders to do this? How are we going to get people to do that? And I think, the basics need to be do it yourself first. So continuously role modelling all the behaviours that you want to change. I went to the D&I Leaders Conference in January this year, and the message for HR, D&I and L&D in the context of what's ahead this year for these roles was all around going back to basics and thinking about why you yourself are in this role. It's got to be more than just passion and desire to change. It's got to be about you firstly role modeling, but then secondly developing a relationship with the leadership team so that you are seen as a true credible partner. And I think as soon as you've got that credibility, you're then able to influence. So it's sort of going a little bit back to basics, I think, and role modeling, and then building that credibility and that relationship as an equal partner with those leadership teams.
Is that almost about recreating the relationships, almost like taking a look and going, okay, how do we need to be different?
Exactly right.
Yeah, it goes back to that point about flexibility within the framework, doesn't it? Okay, we've got policies, but how do we engage leaders with them so they know how to navigate through them, what's appropriate, what they can and can't do? And that's what I've seen a lot of over the years. So, Claire, Any thoughts, additional thoughts on that? Enabling leaders as HR?
Yeah, I mean, Helen touched on it. I think I've seen a lot of training is the answer. Let's roll out this training. Let's roll out that training. Tick, 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 tick. We've done it. And absolutely nothing happens. You might get a few shifts. But I think one of the most important things is understand the problem you're trying to solve. Like, where does it come from? What's the root cause of that? And going back to Jeremy's point, think long term. And then think everybody's starting from a very different place. And then know that most of it comes from a good place. People don't genuinely say stupid things or make mistakes on purpose. Nobody wakes up wanting to make mistakes. They make mistakes because they don't realize what they're doing as a mistake. So I think that space, as Jeremy said, to educate, but then allowing that challenge of this and going, well, I don't really understand. I still don't understand it. It still doesn't, I don't know why I have to do this. And just giving them time. Some people are going to get it. I've spoken to 25-year-old men who are worse than I've ever seen the sort of generations above me, because it's all very done to them now. And it really saddens me that I see sort of the younger generation fighting against this. And I think it's because we're creating a sort of culture of doing to them to make a change. Whereas if we allow, I think, using that coaching sort of ethos of, I'm going to give you the time to work this out. I'm going to show you what I've seen. Let's stay curious. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying there's another version that we need to be looking at, and not blaming people. I think blame is causing the polarization and causing the defense. And going back to that point, no one's fully formed. It's okay. You got it wrong. I got it wrong. I get it wrong all the time. Even as a woman, I'm constantly getting it wrong. You know, it's okay. So I think for me, it's about, let's not throw a load of sheep dip training at people. Let's give them the space to work it out with guidance, education, humility, curiosity, and no judgment.
Right. I'm interested because examples are always helpful, aren't they? Does anybody on the panel got examples of organisations that have done this well within their HR function or L&D, diversity inclusion?
Yeah, there's one I'm happy to share. And I first want to just completely echo everything that Claire and Helen have said, because we need to start thinking about these things differently. We've been doing the same old stuff for years and it's not getting us anywhere. So we need to think about it differently. But I think building on some of the things that Helen and Claire said, the example I'd give is an organisation I've worked with over the last sort of year or so. They're based overseas, a different part of the world, and we've run an allyship program for them, which is around focus particularly on gender. That's their particular the thing they're focusing on. But the reason why they're going to be successful is three things. First of all, they've clearly got the sponsorship from the top of the organisation, and it's authentic. You know, the leaders can talk about, the CEO can talk about why this matters to him personally. So that's a really good starting point. The second thing is they've set a long-term vision. They've got a 3-year goal where they want to get to, and they've articulated that quite well. But the actions that they're taking is, you know, they did some initial quite deep dive awareness training in August. We did that. We had people in a room for a couple of days, and it was really immersive. It was and entertaining, and we really kind of we just tried to enable people to become more aware of the issues, accept the reality, and then give them tools for how they could move forward. We then followed it up with some group coaching to kind of see how they're getting on. We brought them back again a couple of months later to look at how, as a group, they can move the culture forward. And then we did more group coaching a couple of months after that. And so as a result of that, what we're seeing is a subtle but very noticeable cultural shift, because they haven't just said, let's put everyone on some training and magic will happen, which is what I saw in most of my corporate career. They're taking people on a journey that's enabling some people, as Claire said, they get it straight away. They come in and you've got them at hello. And there are others who are resistant and skeptical, and it takes a while for them to kind of start to absorb the stuff, because they come from different places. So if you can take people on a journey like that based on a long-term vision, then I think it can make a real difference. And I have seen in this organisation some tangible, noticeable differences they've made over about an 8-month period, which I think is not bad.
Right.
But it's got a long way to go. So
yeah.
that's one example where I've seen it work, because it's not just based on get everyone in a room for a day and then expect magic to happen.
Just talking to people working in diversity inclusion on the call, having been one myself, I always found it quite difficult to influence change from that role. So I had much more success when I found allies within the business who could help to influence each other. So often they'd roll me out, but it wasn't me they wanted to see, it was the person, the senior leader alongside me they wanted to hear from. So leveraging those relationships to the fullest extent and recognise that we're not necessarily going to change it from that position, but we need to have those stakeholders to help us. Any other examples that people can share, the panel, around how organisations have successfully empowered leaders from the HR D&I perspective? Looking at Helen or Daniela, do you have a point of view?
Yeah, I would just say that, I mean, the first thing to recognise is that HR, if we look at DEI inclusive leadership, it's relatively new. So the first thing we have to recognise is that HR professionals need their own training. And so I think the ones that get it right recognise that from the outset, because unfortunately I do come across a lot of people in this space that don't actually understand culture change. And when it comes down to it, that's what we're talking about. And to expect someone just to all of a sudden understand culture change is just unrealistic. And also, let's be really clear, most HR teams that I work with, they aren't diverse enough when it comes to gender. And so they will often be very female dominated. And so therefore within that team, they won't necessarily have the understanding of someone like me who has a lived experience of having gone through our own journey, of how hard the journey that Jeremy rightly talked about actually is. And that journey, I can tell you now, I've been on that journey for 10 years. It's bloody hard. And, a CEO recently said to me, Danielle, you've got to understand, for the first time in my career, I'm not just being asked to be different at work, I'm being asked to be different at home. Empathy, vulnerability, culture, intelligence goes to the core of who we are as human beings. That stuff takes a long time to shift, and it has quite significant consequences. In the work that I do, it's not unusual for me after 6 months to get back with people and for them to talk about how they've actually lost friends as a result of this, because they don't want to be around those people anymore. So, once you open the box, you can't unsee what you see. So I think understanding that is really, really important.
Moving in a forward direction, because it's the small things, isn't it? Some people look at this and go, I've got to try and grab that elephant and solve it. But this is about creating bite-sized moments where you can move forward rather than stay static, which I've seen happen. People are paralysed by this. It's too big. The elephant's too big.
I think just to finish that section off, Dawn, is I just throw in that in conjunction with a lot of the strategy and the cultural change programs, the coaching programs that we've mentioned, I think having access to something quite, I guess, just quite practical. So some of the organisations we've worked with, they've done all of that. But in addition, because many managers just want to know what to say, what to do in a just-in-time way. So going back to the very simple and basic checklist, so that if a manager is perhaps, they might have gone through leadership programs previously, they might have had access to all of the mentoring, the coaching, etc., the role models. But if they suddenly are faced with somebody coming back from a period of parental leave and they've got no idea what they're meant to do and say in that first week, and they just need to know, God, what is it again? So having access online somewhere, a list of things, and it sounds so obvious, but knowing, for example, just to say, welcome back. And that sounds crazy, but the amount of people that we've coached where they say, look, what do I do? What do I say? And we're like, well, let's start with the basics, shall we? Welcome back. Or when somebody announces their pregnancy, congratulations. So I think it's a real mix, I think, is some of the best programs that I've seen of that sort of the high level future long-term stuff mixed in with I guess just in time specific practical help and support.
Yeah, and that's
I was going to say, to add to that, every leader is also completely different to each other. So there'll be some leaders that are very natural with that. Hi, how you doing? Show me a picture of the baby or that. There'll be others that just go straight for the task. There'll be some that when they hear someone's gone on maternity leave, their first thought is, how the hell am I going to cover them? And giving them again, that acknowledgement that that's going to happen, that's natural. Be aware when that's happening. And I think Helen's point about the practical checklist to really, this is it in black and white. You can flex from it, but start with it. I had an example of it. It wasn't to do with somebody going off, but I had a leader who was very task focused, predominantly always thought about the task first, which is great, drove things forward, really passionate about getting things done. And he would walk past the team every morning. It wasn't his team, it was my team, but he was my boss. And every morning he would walk past and ignore them. And they said in one of the team meetings, does he not like us? Why does he do this? He never says good morning. It's so rude. And so I said to him, you need to say good morning to the team because, they think you don't like them. He goes, of course I like them. So then at sort of 9:02 or something, he would come and say good morning to the team. And a couple of weeks later, they said, it now feels like he's saying it because his diary's told him. So I said, so I said to him, it now looks like your diary's telling you. Well, it has. I've put in a diary note to remind me. I'm like, okay, they think you're rude. I'm not rude. And because he doesn't need a good morning from everybody in the office, it doesn't even come to his mind. So sometimes just that, explicit, like they actually think you're rude. Okay, I don't want to be rude. And then it became natural to him. So that wasn't really a tool for an HR, but it's a story that it always makes me laugh. It was so simple. And it made all the difference. I think he's great.
But it's that authenticity, isn't it, as well? You said it, make it real. It needs to be authentic. People will see straight the way through it if you're doing something because you are ticking a box. So it's that authenticity, which people feel, I think I find that people struggle with that. What does authentic leadership look like, and how can I be that way?
And I just Claire, I want, it's interesting that was a man, and that story could have easily been a woman. But the reality is this, and I think we have to think about society. Is that I work with a lot of men. I do a lot of work in this space in terms of mental health, supporting people, and I wonder what part of that story and I'll tell you, I when I started in this business 6 years ago, I started a business with Nadia Powell. It was the first woman I'd ever worked with as a partner. And for the first 10 minutes every meeting, I was so frustrated. I'm like, seriously, what? You're talking why can't we just get on with the meeting and get stuff done? It took me a whole year. She never said anything to me. She just went in, they talked about everything, everything that was not to do with work. And it took me a year for me to work out, that's emotional intelligence. And unfortunately, what happens is, and I've gone my own journey, is we do know that the patriarchy has made it hard and it has disconnected men from their feelings. And so we're seeing huge issues around that, around mental health. So understanding that dynamic and why we become task orientated, because we're not used to actually sitting with our feelings or talking about how people are feeling. That also does need to shift, because that's it. And also, I know every individual's different, but I am seeing the harm that having men not being able to connect with their feelings is having on them.
I completely agree. That so for me, when I look at inclusive, I know we've kind of swung into gender, but for me, inclusivity is noticing the quiet person in the room, noticing the one that always identifies the things that are going to go wrong and not calling them negative and blocking them out because they're trouble. Noticing the person that focuses on task first because that's what they do. Noticing the person that needs to like people before they can work with them. And just knowing that it's not always a gender thing, but and when you get under the surface of it, yes, that bravado or that history that you've built, that shell that you've built to succeed. And we see it with women. Some women, certainly when I started 20 odd years ago, the more senior women were terrifying. They'd emulated this way of working that was not what I was used to. So I completely agree with that. It's, inclusion is of every type of person, male, female, anything. It's everything.
And on that point, Alice makes a very good point, is around neurodivergence. Is not everyone. Yeah. People's social interaction is very different. There is they don't use it as much simply because they don't want to stereotype. But what I use in the work that I'm doing, the Autism Society did a brilliant video which it showed the experience of an autistic individual of going through the interview process, and there's a point at which the person puts their hand out to shake their hand, and the person doing the interview doesn't shake their hand because they're not comfortable with that. And I always ask people when they see that video, at what point do you think that person didn't get the job? And often they will say when they didn't shake the hand. You're like, well, that's them not being inclusive. That's not understanding that not everyone is comfortable with being touched.
Right.
So thank you, Alison. That's a great point.
I was thinking, just going back to the HR, the L&D, diversity inclusion roles, what can those groups be doing differently to engage leaders more effectively in this whole piece around emotional intelligence? Is it a training course or is it something different? And I'll ask back to Jeremy. Jeremy, you've had loads of experience, haven't you, in Barclays as well? You talked about, what have you seen working well then with HR, diversity inclusion, the L&D and the leadership relationships that makes a difference? It's a big question.
Yeah, it is. No, perhaps I was smiling, just thinking about, because Barclays did a lot of good things, there's no question. But I think a lot of it didn't stick because typically very great content, but not follow through in terms of application, embedding and measuring. Sometimes the context wasn't always right either. So I think that, sorry, could you just repeat the question again?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, again, my experiences of being in a HR, L&D, diversity inclusion roles. I've moved between them all.
Yeah.
It's always difficult to understand boundaries of those roles and leadership and how you make leaders more accountable for things like emotional intelligence. How do they develop it? How do you create awareness in them to be able to do that?
I was talking to someone the other day about, they potentially want to run an emerging leaders program, and it wouldn't be lovely if we could start with all leaders at that point and get them to. I want to come back to Claire's point earlier on about just the importance of knowing yourself and knowing your mind. I always think now, 54 years old, I think the two most important things is to know yourself and be yourself, and then everything else just kind of falls into place. It took me a long time to realize that was okay to be myself, but also to know myself in the first place. So I think that there is something fundamentally for me with all of this stuff. And I can't remember who made the point earlier on about learning new things. Again, it might have been Claire, but it's okay to learn new stuff. It's okay to be, my age and learn new things. I mean, I read something brilliantly. There's a book I read recently called Think Again, which is about this whole idea. And one of the comments in there is that when a very, very esteemed professor had his whole kind of research challenged by someone, and when this person who challenged it very nervously met the professor, he said, well, what did you think? And the professor said, oh no, I loved it because you proved I'm wrong, and that's fantastic. That means tomorrow I'll be less wrong. And that kind of acceptance that you cannot possibly know everything, that vulnerability is wonderful, but it's so rare. And I think it's not because people are generally arrogant and hard-nosed. It's because organizations teach us that we got to be right. We got to have our knowledge, and it's really hard to unlearn things. So I think if you can get people into a mindset of it's absolutely fine to find out you're wrong, to learn new things, and you should be constantly doing that. Because Michelangelo said at age 87, I'm still learning. So if it's good enough for him, it certainly should be good enough for the rest of us.
No, great point. I think for me as well, seeing, again, what I used to do was start thinking about my own role modeling. So be vulnerable, be courageous, call stuff out, I think, as Claire mentioned. And then the more you do that, the more it seems to be normalized. The leaders think, yes, I can do that too. So it just it just requires a certain amount of courage.
One of the things we did, Dawn, which was a real shift in our leadership approach or training to leaders, actually, which I think HR could lean into more, is you've seen there'll be loads of psychometric tools out there. Everyone's used different psychometric tools, and what I've found with all the ones that I've done is that they box you.
Right.
You'll be a really good CEO, you'll be a terrible one, you'll be good at art and design, and you won't be, and it's very judgy. And we actually brought in a tool by a company called Mindflick that was based on its performance psychology, but with elite athletes, and looking at that real reliance on mindset and your emotional response to things, and understanding that you can be, very optimistic about something or very prudent about something, as well as being quite contained emotionally and very sort of interchangeable emotionally. And we put all our people leaders through a short program that not only had their own profiling, which is all strengths based. So it all came out as really good. And basically the answer was your greatest strength is your greatest take care, because when you overplay that, people see it differently. And once we taught them that, we actually created monsters to start with. They all came back very, very empowered to be themselves. And it's absolutely right to be me, and the business needs more of me. And then we got them to do profiles on members of their team. And these lovely light bulb moments of, oh, wow, they are so different to me. And what I've been doing must be really bothering them and upsetting them. And so that sort of, you know, gifting the line man or gifting people leaders a tool that helps them understand themselves better, helps them understand the teams better without forcing them to do something. It's an awareness. They go sort of ding, oh my goodness, it's not about me, it's about them. And how can I shift to make their experience better? And it's that lovely benefit mindset. We talk about growth mindset a lot, but that benefit mindset, you know, I want to be a better leader to benefit the people that work with me, not because it gets me a promotion or because it makes me, you know, get a high rating. And I think that empowerment from HR to say, here's a tool, go and use it. It doesn't box. We don't judge. We don't make you put it on your email and everyone knows who you are and what you are. It's what you lead with, and it's how it's a tool that will help you. So we've seen great shifts and things like that.
Hey, can I just jump on that on strengths? I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of the strengths based, simply because I know I wouldn't be where I am today if I just focus on my strengths that I had 10 years ago. And I know that's not what you're saying, but I'd also want to talk about context. And I can tell you, so I was ex-CEO of an agency. There is no way in a million years the last word someone would have described me was having the power of soft. No one. Literally, it'd have been the last thing anyone would have described me as. But the minute I moved into this space and I had to listen, I realized actually my voice wasn't, I had so much to learn. And actually I was sitting often on panels with just women. That was the first time someone came up to me. Actually, he wrote the book, The Power of Soft, came up to me and said, he gave me his book and he said, you've got the power of soft. And that's put me in a different position. That's actually, and so environment, I think, is so important. So we have to create, and this is what we have to recognize. And I think Josh, and I'm going to go back to men, because I just know how many men struggle when we talk about inclusive leadership. And Josh Connolly talked about it. He said, it's not about fixing men. It's about creating an environment where they can be their full authentic selves. So often I do worry that men aren't being given, and actually women aren't being given the opportunity to be themselves forever. Let's be really clear. But actually, men often in society aren't able to be something that they could be, and they don't even know what that could be until you create the environment to allow them to explore it.
So let me just take a bit of a recap here, because we're coming to the end, and I want to make sure we've got some time for some questions at the end that people may have put through. What I'm going to ask you, you know I'm going to ask you this, each of you, what, if you had one thing that you would like to leave the audience with today, what would it be? And I'm going to first of all start with Jeremy, if that's okay.
I think the one thing I would say, and this is perhaps my own reflections now, running my own business for 4 years, having spent 27 years in the corporate world, is just to be curious. I mean, it's been mentioned a few times, but just be willing to go out and learn new things. You know, talk to different people, listen to what they have to say, and absorb as much information as possible. There's so many interesting books, podcasts, TED Talks, but some of the best learning I've had is those kind of acts as a catalyst for curiosity. But then you talk to other people, that's where I've really got a lot of learning. So yeah, just have a constantly curious mindset, particularly if you're
love that. And also lean into it, isn't it? I really love that. Lean into difference. Talk to people that don't look like you.
Yeah,
you know, to find out more and create common ground, that kind of stuff. Great point, Jeremy. Thank you. Helen, any particular one takeaway, particularly with a sort of parents and carers perspective?
Yeah, I think I would go with the really coaching and helping leaders, and also doing it for yourself as well, to offer very tailored leadership support during times of transition. So not just that parental transition, but recognizing that everybody is going to go through really, really hard times, and really understanding that, I suppose, taking time to get to know your team members so that you know what challenges they're facing, and you're able to tailor your leadership to really support what that individual needs.
Right. Yeah. And understanding people are, as you say, different. And I mean, examples, have you got an example of a particular transitional point that you might want to bring out on that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we haven't covered today is like midlife and menopause, and that's something which, you know, a lot of people struggle with, not just women going through menopause, but men also struggling with midlife health and stress issues. So it's looking at, as a leader, be mindful that some of the people, maybe the over 50s, the over 45s in your team, don't assume that they can operate in the same way that they have always done, because they may well be going through challenges on a physical and emotional level that you've got no idea about. So it's just really being mindful of some of these big life and health changes that many people struggle with.
I think that to add to that, I mean, I'm being open here. In my experience on menopause, when you've met one menopausal woman, you've met one menopausal woman. So it's not about categorizing them. It's about making sure that you understand that each person's different, will have a different experience. Thanks, Helen. Daniela.
I would just say, don't underestimate how difficult the journey might be, especially for male leaders. I love the fact Jeremy talked about the good examples, group coaching. I would say that you definitely need group coaching and/or individual coaching. I'd even throw into the pot, and I know companies are scared of doing it, but I think we should be offering therapy. I think people do have to go on their own journeys. Selfspace is a brilliant organization that can support in that therapy. So we were on, obviously, when I ran a consultancy, we gave everyone, I think, something like 10 hours of therapy a year as just part of their packages. But I think understanding that support is really, really important.
Yeah, and actually navigating people towards it as well as leaders. Great. And Claire, any takeaway for yourself?
So all of that, like, love all of that. I suppose mine is back to what I said earlier. More tick box sheep dip training is not the answer. That focused attention. Everyone's different approaches. I think, you know, group coaching, I absolutely love when you can create that space for people to share and connect. And absolutely what Danielle said is that this is going to take time. Like, just don't think you've done it when you've done a few things, you've ticked a box. Take time, give it time, because culture takes a while to change. But as long as you're moving forward, you're not moving backwards.
Yeah, like shifting an oil tanker, isn't it? Shifting the culture. Yeah. Thank you. So Helen, I'm really conscious that we've talked a lot and we didn't leave as much time as I would have liked for questions and answers, but we do have a question, don't we, Helen, from what you were saying?
Got a couple of questions. Are you able to see the questions at all, Dawn, from your side, or if not,
I can't see them.
Okay, so we've got two questions that I'd like to just pull out. First of all, around neurodivergence. So the fact that, as we've been talking, and we've covered a little bit of this, the fact that social interactions don't always come naturally to everyone. So I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts around leadership for neurodivergence.
I mean, all I would say is a bit like Dawn said. I coached a number of neurodivergent people, and they've said to me, my first question is, what does that mean for you? And how do you want to work this? And quite often they say, well, you've now met one neurodivergent person and that's it. And so it's that, again, treating everybody as they need to be treated. And I think going back to the point about the handshake in the interview is so key. That judgment, we've got to stop judging on our perceptions.
What was the second question? There was a second one, was the Helen you mentioned?
So the second question, I'll read it out. So still finding barriers in policing with men and women when talking about vulnerability. So it's misunderstood and conceived as weakness. And this goes very much against the classic sense of what we as police are there for. Have you any tailored tactics for particular professions? Or is it just about knowing that we're slightly more challenging than others because of our identity?
So if you don't mind, I'll answer this one simply because I've got it wrong. So I've been on the stage and I've spoken about losing my brother, and I've cried on the stage, and I can tell you now that not a single person in that room thought I was being weak. Vulnerability is not weakness; it is the root of courage. But people don't. We need to show people to see that. The story I'm going to tell you is I run inclusive leadership training, and as part of that, we ask people to be vulnerable. We ask them to share stories that they would not normally share, but we ask them to make sure that they're not triggered. We both opened it up with very vulnerable stories from a personal level, including mine, which was around grief. That room wasn't ready to go that deep and that quickly. And so what happened was they saw vulnerability as personal life, opening yourself up to that side. And so we apologized and we got it better. We made it better for the next session. But I think the key thing that I would say around vulnerability is just start with actually understanding what that means in the workplace. Yeah. And when that means in the workplace is one, apologizing when you got it wrong. When I ran that program, I stood up in front of all the people in the second module and I apologized for getting it wrong. I had never done that before. And it was horrible. But it was needed, and it showed people that we were listening to them, their feedback was important to us, and we take it seriously. The second thing is just make sure that you're being human and you're connecting with someone at a human level. So certainly I'm not and I have to say, Stuart, it's so lovely to see you because, you know, we've been connected on LinkedIn and I love the work you're doing. It gives me so much belief. So thank you. And we do need to connect at one point, but just that I think being vulnerable also just shows that humanity. And with my interactions with anyone that sits in those positions of authority is coming down at that human level and showing that empathy and being open to that is where you get that connection. So for me, it's about how do you create that connection? And sometimes by just being vulnerable, by telling your story or actually putting it in context and showing someone that actually you understand, and through that vulnerability, getting that connection can de-escalate certain situations. So for me, it's that humanity bit, and the vulnerabilities that allows you to show you're human.
Thanks for sharing your story, Daniela, on that one as well. Appreciate the openness on that experience. So I'm going to go back to Helen now because I'm conscious we've gone over an hour here, and about a couple of minutes. Is there anything you'd like to close with? I'll pass back to you.
No, only thanks to everyone, really. Thank you to you, Dawn, for facilitating, and thanks to all of our panel members for sharing today. Really just following up everyone who has signed up for the webinar, whether they attended or they're listening to the recording, will get a checklist. So it will be all around mapping the moments that matter for inclusive leadership, created by Dawn herself. So we will be sending this out automatically. So anyone who's been listening in and wants to get that sort of very practical takeaway that they can use internally to help managers and to help themselves, that is on its way.
I'm going to also be sharing my model. So finding uniqueness, connect difference, create belonging. And I can explain that a lot more if I actually share it with you to understand how that applies to what we've been talking about. But yeah, it's been fantastic talking to my wonderful panelists here. I always learn a lot from others in this subject because we're all very much experts in this field, or so-called experts in this field. So thank you. Okay, we're good to go. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.